we're out of time, but I do want to just get some brief thoughts on this, because I do think this is a good question. Someone who has been here, probably a pastor, has been struck by how faithful Calvin preached and taught and had to study so that he could preach and teach so often. And this person is saying to give yourself to that amount of preaching and teaching and study, and to take care of your family, and to take care of the church's needs is very daunting. And so they're asking, how are they supposed to be an effective preacher with all of these challenges? How should they try to balance those? I thought it'd be good to just close on that one.
Well, it would be impossible to try and mimic what Calvin did. I mean, Calvin was unique, and his context was unique, and his gifts were fairly unique too. But I do think that for every minister of the gospel, there's really no excuse for not being in your study up until lunchtime every day. I mean, most pastors, unless they're in multi-staff situations where there are lots of meetings taking place, most pastors can at least have 4 or 5 hours in the morning that are devoted to study, whether that's directly studies for a sermon or study over and above sermonic preparation, which I thoroughly recommend. And there should be at least one morning where you're not studying anything at all to do with your preaching, but studying something that's a hobby of yours. But that's a lot of time. Even that alone would multiply the amount of time I can have for study.
At the risk of sounding self-serving, let me say, particularly to any young people who are here, the better educated you can be before you go into the pastorate, the more efficient you can be as a student of the Word in the study as a pastor. And so do avail yourself. Calvin knew Greek and Hebrew quite fluently before he ever became a pastor, and that greatly facilitated his pastoral work.
Yeah. The question also asks about family. I would understand that 1 Timothy 3, leading your family well, managing your family well, is actually prerequisite to ministry. So that needs to be a priority, and a man needs to be given over to doing that. You're holding, the question holds that in tension with caring for the flock. I would encourage the person to consider their regular preaching and teaching and application of the Word as the primary way in which you care for the flock and feed the flock. So care for your family, lead your family well, give yourself over to protecting time for study, whether that's 4 or 5 hours every morning, or whether that's 2 or 3 days that are blocked out. I think that proportion is right. And see that as your main ministry in the flock. Otherwise, I think you teach the congregation a set of expectations you could never live to, and that are probably beyond the Scripture, and that are a recipe for death in the pastorate.
People have different gifts. And one of the dangers of a conference like this is that you meet, brilliant people like Bob Godfrey and wonderful pastors like Thabiti Anyabwile, and then you meet R.C. And everybody goes away saying, wonderfully encouraged, terrifically inspired, and I can't do that, now I'm feeling guilty and somewhat depressed. That's the danger of a conference. In fact, that's why I wrote about my dad, Memoirs of an Ordinary Pastor. Because most of the work of the church is done, 99% by ordinary pastors who are never going to write an important book, and never going to speak at a national conference. But when the trumpets sound on the last day, we will find that many who are last will be first. And so you... So you don't want to get in the habit of comparing service records. You don't want to do that. Jesus has some pretty strong things to say to John and Peter about that, to Peter in particular in John 21. If I want him to last till the second coming, it's none of your flipping business. Get on with it. I want you to be a martyr. So you have to realize that there are different callings and graces. Do you see? Having said that, one of the things that happens in the local church is that time demands are an endless black hole. And in most churches, there are few people whom I refer to with my students as bottomless pit parishioners. by which I mean they will demand more and more and more and more of your time. They're bottomless pits, and they never produce anything. So part of the responsibility is figuring out how to be kind and courteous and loving toward them, but not let them take over, because you'll starve the other 80%. A huge part of pastoral priority in study is simply prioritizing. So unless you do that, diligent study is not done by accident. You don't drift either into prayer. Much praying is not done because we don't plan to pray. Much study is not done because we don't plan to study. So a huge amount, although it's going to look different for each person, even in stages of life, how many children you've got, what stages they're at a certain stage, you might have to devote quite a lot of hours to going to the next squeaky violin concert or whatever it is you're going to. But there are stages of life, and having sorted out all of those things, then there are still priorities that you must be a minister of the word and prayer, and you must feed the flock of God, and you must become a worker who doesn't need to be ashamed as you handle the word of truth, and so on. You get those priorities, and then you break up your day and leave the rest to the Lord.